All right, hello, and welcome back to the Broken Business Models podcast. We're your hosts, Ryan and James. And before we get into today's podcast, just a quick disclaimer that nothing in this podcast or any of our other materials should be taken as investment advice. Either of us could hold positions in any stock mentioned in these podcasts, and we could change those positions at any time and without notice. So make sure you do your own work and consult a professional before making any investment decision. With that being said, today we're continuing our coverage of kind of questionable business models within the SPAC space with Virgin Galactic. So, Virgin Galactic, many of you may recognize from as one of the most hyped up companies to go public back in the 2020 2021 SPAC craze. And it seems like they may be finally running to the end of their line. So, with that, James, do you want to take it over and explain the foundational and fundamentals behind Virgin Galactic?
Yeah, so Virgin Galactic, as most people know, is one of the first SPACs on the market. I think it was actually in late 2019 that it went public, and it was Chamath Palihapitiya's first SPAC. And if you've watched our main channel, Wall Street Millennial, you will know that we're not exactly huge fans of Chamath, to say the least. And and a lot of that, and we'll see why when we start looking into Virgin Galactic. But Virgin Galactic, it's a space tourism company founded by Richard Branson, and the idea was that they were going to create these rocket ships that will allow rich people to pay a few $100,000 and they can go up into space. And when they did the SPAC, they give some extremely bullish projections about how profitable the business model would be. So in the SPAC presentation, they say they expected the space flights, once they start, to have a contribution margin of 66%. So that's very profitable. They said that they would begin doing commercial flights in 2020, just 1 year after the SPAC. And then they said that by 2023, they would be flying 1,500 passengers in that year, generating 590 million of revenue and $274 million of EBITDA. Well, now we're in 2023. Let's see if they've been able to meet any of those targets. And obviously, they have not. So Chamath dumped his entire stake in the company and stepped down from the board of directors in 2021. Currently, as of 2023, they only have one working spacecraft. They are on track to generate about $7 million of revenue this year. This is a little over 1% of the projection for 2023 that they gave in their SPAC presentation. They're on track to burn about $500 million this year. And the contribution margin of the space flights is probably negative. And we'll get into why we think that shortly. So Virgin Galactic currently only has one airplane or one spaceship, the VSS Unity, which is operating and doing commercial space flights. So the VSS Unity, it first did a test flight in 2018, but then it wasn't for another 5 years in 2023 that they started doing commercial space flights with paying customers. And it has 4 passenger seats, so 4 passengers can go up into space at a time. So in 2021, they also unveiled a VSS Imagine, and that's a new, more advanced spaceship. But the VSS Imagine has never flown, and they also in 2021 they talked about they were working on yet a third spaceship called the VSS Inspire. But this one, it appears it has not been completed, and I have not seen any pictures of it. Now, this is really interesting. The publication Ars Technica talked with a senior Virgin Galactic executive, Mike Moses, in August of 2023. And Ars Technica asked him about the VSS Imagine because it was unveiled 2 years ago, but we haven't really seen much about it. It's never flown. So what's going on? And Moses said it's mostly done. So he says that the VSS Imagine is almost complete. but they're still debating whether or not they're actually going to fly it. And thus far, they have never flown it. So it appears like they never even finished construction of it, at least not to the point where it can even fly. And as we'll see later in the presentation, they're tabling the VSS Imagine and VSS Inspire. They're putting them off to one side because they're going to focus on a new, different type of spacecraft that they plan to build in the future, called the Delta class. We'll talk about shortly. But the main takeaway is they only have this one spacecraft that actually worked. They have this other spaceship that has never flown, and they've basically given up on it. And then there was a third spaceship that they talked about, but it looks like it's never been built, and we've never seen any pictures of it. So right now, it's just the one spaceship, VSS Unity. So the VSS Unity indeed began its first commercial operations, flying paying customers in June of 2023. And this was considered to be a big accomplishment for the company. And they started off doing one flight per month. And that seems like quite a long time to wait in between each flight. You would think you would want to do as many flights as possible to generate as much revenue as possible. So the reason why the flight cadence is so infrequent, just one per month, is that there is a significant amount of maintenance required in between each flight. So, I mean, these are rocket ships. They travel extremely fast. The engine burns at a very high temperature. There's a lot of stress on the ship, such that after every single flight, a bunch of parts have to be checked, maintained, or even replaced to make sure it's safe. So, this is rocket science. It's not easy stuff. So there's a huge amount of maintenance that has to be done in between each flight. So based on the current prices, they charge $450,000 per flight. The VSS Unity has capacity for 4 passengers. So that gets you to about $2 million per flight if the flight is fully loaded with paying customers. Now, at one flight per month, which is only 12 flights per year, that $2 million per flight gets you about $24 million per year. Now, $24 million a year is not nearly enough to cover Virgin Galactic's fixed cost, even if you assume that they had the 66% contribution margin, which they said they expected from the SPAC presentation. But spoiler alert, the current spaceship is almost certainly not generating a 66% contribution margin. We think it's actually generating a negative contribution margin. But either way, the one spaceship, VSS Unity alone, is not going to be enough to turn Virgin Galactic profitable. So they need to get more spaceships. And that's where the Delta class comes in. And we talked about a couple of slides previously how they had the VSS Imagine and the VSS Inspire, which they basically tabled, put off to one side, and they're not going to finish those because now they're going to work on this Delta class. So they started talking about the new Delta class spaceship in early 2022. And they said that, this Delta spaceship is going to be far superior to the current VSS Unity. First of all, it's going to be larger. It's going to have enough seats to have 6 passengers instead of 4 for the VSS Unity. And they say that the maintenance burden on the Delta class will be far less, such that it can be flown every single week instead of every month for the VSS Unity. So it can hold 50% more passengers and fly 4 times as often. So it is a much better spaceship than their current one, and the economics, they say, will be far superior on a per flight basis. They say that they will build the spaceship over the next few years. They will begin test flights in 2025, and they will begin flying paying customers with the Delta class in 2026. So this is their timeline of what they said, and they said basically are saying, just give us till 2026 and we get these Delta classes flying, and then we will become profitable. This sounds great, but the problem is the Delta class spaceship does not exist and is basically vaporware. And one of the most I would say, pathetic things I've ever seen any company do was what Virgin Galactic did with their Q2 2023 earnings presentation. So, their big thing is the Delta spaceship, and that's, what they talk about the most. And one of the slides in their Q2 earnings presentation has this picture. You see a spaceship here, and it says Spaceship Delta. So if you just see this, you would think, oh, that is the Delta spaceship that they're working on, right? Well, the CEO in the earnings call was, asked about this, and he said, page 9, that's this page 9, I think, of the accompanying deck, which was talking about our Delta class ships, that image is actually an image of Imagine. So this is VSS Imagine. This is not a Delta class ship. This is the VSS Imagine, which they unveiled in 2021, but it doesn't even fly, and they're not even working on it anymore. So they're basically just, it's extremely misleading to put this to put the image of the VSS Imagine and then write Spaceship Delta when it is not the Spaceship Delta. It's just not correct. And what I think is particularly damning about them putting the VSS Imagine picture here is that it implies they don't even have the designs complete. They can't even give us a CGI rendering of the Delta class spaceship because the design is not even complete yet. If they had the design complete, they could at least give us a CGI rendering. They don't have to, give us a completely different spaceship, which is not the Delta class on this picture. So as of 2023, they have not even completed the design for the Delta class. They do not even have a CGI rendering. And then they say they're going to start test flying this spaceship in 2 years in 2025 when it does not even exist. And then they're going to start commercial operations 3 years from now in 2026. It's just insane that they expect us to believe this when they even have to basically lie and put this VSS Imagine and label it as Delta. Yeah, and I was talking about the timeline is absurd, and to get an idea of just how absurd their stated timeline for the Delta class is, the VSS Unity, their only working spaceship, they began constructing it in 2012. Their first flight was 6 years later in 2018, and its first commercial flight was 11 years later in 2023. So from the beginning of manufacturing to actually flying paying customers was 11 years. In the case of the Delta class, um, it probably has not even completed the design stage because we haven't even seen a CGI rendering of it. And they're trying to get us to believe that it's going to be having commercial operations in 3 years when it took 11 years for the VSS Unity. Not only that, but this Delta spaceship is going to be 50% bigger and be able to fly 4 times more often. So this is, far more technologically advanced than the VSS Unity. This would be an extremely difficult technological feat to accomplish. And they're saying, and they expect us to believe that they're going to be able to complete it in, a quarter of the time it took them to make the Unity. And now let's talk about the current operations, the VSS Unity. As I said earlier, they were flying the Unity at a rate of once per month. Well, in Q3, in their Q3 earnings, they announced that they would be reducing the flight cadence of Unity from flying to quarterly versus monthly. So they used to be flying one flight per month. Now they're going to reduce that to one flight per quarter. So why are they reducing the number of flights? Well, they say they are trying to reduce net spending and to conserve cash because they're losing money and they have to conserve cash. Now, why would you reduce the number of flights to conserve cash? Well, probably because each flight is losing money. And remember that in the 2019, when they did their SPAC presentation, they said they expected to have 66% contribution margins. The contribution margin means the revenue from the flight minus all of the variable expenses involved in making that flight happen. So it's not including any of the fixed costs, just the variable costs. Now, if your contribution margin is positive, then the more flights you do, the more money you make, and vice versa. So the only way in which you would save money by reducing the number of flights is if your contribution margin is negative, which appears to be the case because that's exactly what they're doing. So this is a huge failure. They say that it would be a 66% contribution margin. Now it's a negative contribution margin. Almost certainly is a negative contribution margin. That's the only way to explain what they're doing here. And so we talked about kind of the problems with their delays, and their delays in beginning the commercial operations, and their lack of economic viability on a per flight basis with the Unity. But the other piece of the picture is demand. These space flights cost $450,000. That's a lot of money. And even if they can build these Delta spacecraft and have all this capacity to fly all these people into space, will there be enough paying customers willing to buy the tickets? So, in their SPAC presentation, they bragged about significant pent up 5-year demand yet to be serviced. And what they're referring to is uh, before 2014, the Virgin Galactic, you were able to make a reservation for Virgin Galactic. So, you would pay them the money, and then your name would be recorded. And then once they have the spaceships up and running, then you could go and get your space flight. And then in 2014, they closed reservations. They did not accept new reservations. And by that point, they had 603 reservations. But there was a 5-year period between 2014 and 2019 when they did the SPAC, which there was you were not able to do reservations. And they said, oh, we had a huge amount of inbound calls of people wanting to reserve, but because we closed reservations, they couldn't. And then so as soon as we open reservations, there will be all this massive pent up demand of all these people who want to reserve their tickets. Well, they reopened their reservations in February of 2022. And as of their most recent 10Q, which was in September 30th, 2023, they said that they had reservations for approximately 800 people. So they reopened the reservations and it increased from 603 to 800. So they had 200 reservations. And that was the significant pent up demand for 5 years. And this is tiny, an increase of 200. They only got 200 reservations. And to get a sense of just how small that was, remember that according to the SPAC presentation, they expected to fly 1,500 passengers into space in 2023. 1,500. And when they reopened reservations have been open for more than a year since they reopened it, and they only got 200 reservations, which is tiny compared to the number of passengers they said that they expected to be able to fly in their SPAC presentation. So there's not that much demand for this. Is the main takeaway. And so, why is there so little demand for Virgin Galactic? Well, one potential thing is, if you remember this summer, there was the very high profile Ocean Gate disaster where that was the tourist submarine thing that goes down to look at the wreckage of the Titanic. And there was 5 people in the submarine, the pilot plus 4 passengers, and all of them tragically died. And this was a huge international news story. Everyone was talking about this. And in a lot of ways, this Ocean Gate thing has a lot of similarities to Virgin Galactic. It's these very expensive, very extreme tourism things, which potentially have a lot of risk. And in the case of Virgin Galactic, somebody has already died in a Virgin Galactic plane. That was a test pilot, died when a Virgin Galactic spaceship crashed in 2014. So somebody has already died in a Virgin Galactic. And then, the risks of these types of extreme tourism things has been, brought into the public attention with Ocean Gate. And additionally, last year, Virgin Galactic was sued by, it was the subject of a shareholder lawsuit, which alleged that the Virgin Galactic airplanes were not safe. And every time after the spaceship does its flight, allegedly there would be a bunch of tiny cracks on the wings of the spaceship, making it look like cracked eggshells. Now, I don't know if this cracked eggshells thing is true, but imagine if you're a prospective customer and you see all of these headlines. Would you feel comfortable going onto a Virgin Galactic airplane? I personally would not, and maybe that explains why the reservations have been so sluggish. And finally, they are running out of cash. So currently, as of the end of the third quarter, they had $1.1 billion of cash on their balance sheet. They burn $500 million a year, so they have a little more than 2 years worth of cash burn remaining. And in 2027, they have $400 million of debt coming due. So before 2027, they're going to have to do, a massive capital raise. And they will not generate significant revenue and certainly will not generate any significant contribution profit until the Delta class is up and running. Now, they say this Delta class is gonna be up, begin commercial service in 2026. Even if that were true, which I don't believe, they still don't even have, they have barely enough cash to get them through the next 2 years. So they're probably going to have to do a massive and dilutive equity raise between then and now. And given how far the share price has fallen, that will be extremely dilutive to shareholders. And one thing to note is that given that the cash situation is getting desperate, they only have about 2 years of cash left and this massive debt maturity coming. Management has every incentive to get the stock price to rise because they need the stock. They're going to need to sell stock to stay afloat because their cash burn situation is so dire. Um, and that's why you get these absurd timelines saying that they're going to have this, magical Delta class ship coming online in 2026, which is, as we talked about, this timeline is insanely optimistic when compared to their track record with the VSS Unity, which took 11 years. But the management has every incentive to overpromise because anything they can do to get the stock price up increases the company's chances of survival because they almost certainly will have to do significant equity raises over the next year or so. And just to show about, how ridiculous this whole situation is, in their 2019 SPAC presentation, they gave all these insane projections. So the SPAC was in 2019. They said they would make an EBITDA profit in 2020 by 2021, and they'd be extremely profitable, have 46% EBITDA margin, 270 million of EBITDA in 2023. Well, these all of their everything that they said, commercial operations would start in 2020. They'd become profitable in 2021. There's massive pent up demand. They'll make a 66% contribution margin. Every single one of these things has turned out to not be the case, over the past few years. So all of their projections were incorrect. And then now they're saying, oh, well, just give us another chance with this Delta class. We'll begin commercial operations in 2026. And they gave this chart saying, you see, we'll have the Delta class here, and then we will become hugely profitable. But why would you believe them now when they were so wrong in the past? And as a wise man once said, if you fool me, you can't get fooled again. And that's what I think is really the situation with Virgin Galactic, them promising, we're finally going to turn things around with a Delta class. But in my opinion, they have zero credibility given how disastrously they failed in their SPAC projections.
I think that's a very interesting point about the Delta class. I think, like, if you think about it from the perspective of someone like you or me, James, like a regular individual investor who is a type of investor that's probably most likely to consider buying a SPAC company like Virgin Galactic. it might be easy to kind of see these presentations from management that talk about the new Delta class spaceship and 50% more passengers per space flight, several times more flights per month than the current Unity spacecraft, and better profitability, better economics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and then kind of feel good about the company's prospects going forward in terms of turning things around from a financial perspective. But then, like as you point out, like if you think about it, everything that's positive about all that is nothing more than just optimistic projections, right? And like this is a company that we've seen give very optimistic projections in the past that and have them horrendously underperform and underdeliver on those projections. So in with all that being said, in this company that does not have a good track record in an industry that, as you mentioned, is a extremely difficult, is literally rocket science, and then you add in like consumer safety to it. Um, shouldn't you, as a responsible investor to yourself, want and demand like actual more evidence about this Delta class spaceship before using it as the focal point of any bullish thesis for this company turning itself around?
Yeah, and I think the most important data point that kind of goes along with what you just said is this this their Q2 presentation where they give you a picture of the VSS Imagine and then say Spaceship Delta. And it's just so egregious. And as you said, if you're going to trust, the only evidence we have about this class is what the management has told us. We haven't seen any pictures of it because the pictures don't exist. The spaceship does not exist. And then how are you going to trust people who try to trick you with a fake picture? I mean, the picture is real, but it's not a picture. It's not what they say it is. And so you're going to trust these people who try to mislead you with this picture. And for me, that's just a deal breaker. The only, when you have these unprofitable speculative growth companies, you're paying for the future. You're betting on the future because obviously the business in its current form is unviable. But if you're betting on the future, you have to trust the science of what they're doing, trust the technology, trust that the management team is competent and is telling you the truth and is actually going to be able to deliver on what they promise. But every single thing is just pointing to the fact that this whole Virgin Galactic has been a complete and total failure. And now they're just floundering around trying to make whatever projections they can to convince somebody to buy their stock so that they can, live another few months.
Yeah, I think for me, I feel like one of the most unredeeming qualities of a publicly traded company, like the ones that we've talked about on this podcast, is when when you look at all the evidence against the company, and then you have no choice but to almost feel sorry for the people trying to run the company. And I think there are a few other companies that come to mind immediately. And when you look at this picture of the spaceship Delta, quote unquote, that's not actually a spaceship Delta, admittedly by the CEO, it's like you almost feel sorry for them, right?
Yeah.
You would not want to be in the position of the CEO of this company.
Yeah, absolutely. I would also not want to be in the position of a shareholder of the company as the stock has declined 80% from its SPAC price and, well over 90% from its
Or a
all-time highs.
passenger on one of these ships, potentially, from a safety perspective.
Yeah, or the test pilot, That's another thing we should never forget that these things, it's not just financial consequences, it's safety consequences. A man is dead on a Virgin Galactic flight. This was a long time ago. But I mean, another thing to be concerned about is that as the cash flow situation at Virgin is getting so desperate, And then potentially, this is all hypothetical, but as the management team, in the company at large becomes, more and more desperate to show progress, because they know they're running out of cash and running out of time, will they maybe try to, push the bounds a little bit in how many flights they do, the cadence of flights, how much time they leave for maintenance? And that also, kind of will, maybe that creates sort of a death spiral for the company, where as the financial condition becomes more and more desperate, prospective customers are going to get more and more concerned, because the company is in such a bad condition. Do they even have the money to do the proper maintenance? Um, and why would you feel comfortable going on to a spaceship when the company is mismanaged so disastrously, and the management is so dishonest, and someone has already died, and you're literally putting your life on the line to go into one of these spacecraft?
And one final thought that I had about this is, if you think about it, everyone involved in this company at the highest levels who is able to have left has left, essentially, right? Like Richard Branson, he's already a billionaire. He's not
Hmm.
really that involved in day-to-day operations in the company. And then Chamath, he's completely sold
Hmm.
out of the company and left as of 2021. And so everyone who can leave basically has left, and that leaves the current management kind of desperate to do whatever they can to increase the share price so that they can raise more money and stay alive for a couple more quarters. And that's not a good thing if
Yeah,
you're an existing shareholder looking to be not diluted.
yeah. So this is, I think that's about everything we have for today's presentation. I think this is one of the most disastrous companies we've looked at on the channel so far, and certainly one of the most tragic companies, given the death of the test pilot in 2014. But as always, if anybody in the viewership has anything to any opinions on Virgin Galactic, anything you think we might have missed, please let us know in the comments section below, and we will see you all on the next one.